So, and there you have it. I'm told that the stage will absolutely disappear. It will crumble if I'm late, so I have pressure to get finished quickly, which means I'm going to start with a couple of disclaimers. Number one, I only agree to speak anywhere, no matter what they want me to talk about, if I can talk about first. So we will end with my groveling and begging for support among all the technical people out there to become mentors. It's the most critical shortage we have at first, and we need technically competent people to help. Number two, other than talking about first, I'm certainly not a professional speaker in any way. I love to talk about various ones of my projects, water, power, some exciting new stuff that we're doing, but the folks at PTC pointed out, you know, you're all doing different projects. Rather than focus on any one, we should talk about innovation in general. And I think innovation in general it's like love, maybe, or pornography. Everybody knows what it is, but nobody knows how to describe it. So I will give you this disclaimer that I put together a bunch of stuff that I've done on the concept of what is innovation, with the following important caveat, and I hope this will buy me some slack with the technology community here. For 30 years, I've been building various kinds of technology, mostly for large company clients. Every once in a while, we get one right. You deliver to the client, it becomes a big product for them, and inevitably, the management of these companies will have some kind of meeting and say, Dean, will you come talk to us about how your little company does innovation so well? And it always occurs to me, if they only knew the 99% of the time we fail just like them, they probably wouldn't be asking me this. But we have a very good system. We make all of our stupid mistakes internally, and we only show the world the stuff that works. It's a pretty good thing. And then the first time I actually started thinking about how to respond to that for one of my large clients, and what they're really asking me to do is come to some giant organization and explain to them how to act like a tiny little group. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized how preposterous, silly, ridiculous that is. You know, big companies are very good at doing what big companies do. Good process, good consistency, et cetera. And the world needs that. Little companies, particularly very small R&D companies, don't have that capability. And the first time I went to talk to one of these large companies, I basically said, it's like you're world-class gold medalist in the shot put, 300-pound gorillas out there, and you're asking me to teach you how to look good in a tutu. It won't work. I think our little company does what we do well, which mostly involves things like, you know, high risk and failure. And I'm not sure that that is an admirable or responsible goal for the big guys. But over the years, since it's become quite consistent among my clients, will you please come and talk to us about this? I've decided to put a deck of ideas together on that subject. Now, however, talking to the guys that really do the technology, I think most of you are that, I hope you'll find this appropriately silly and humorous as opposed to good advice. And I say that because, as you'll soon see, I'm genetically incapable of not being sarcastic. And I wouldn't want real engineers and technology people and designers to think I'm so pretentious as I'm going to stand here and tell you how to be, you know, innovative. If I could tell people how to be innovative, I'd be sitting on a cloud throwing lightning bolts. So with the caveat that this entire deck was intended to go out and be really talking mostly to the management of big companies as opposed to the engineers and developers. And by the way, if you're in management and you're insulted by all of this, you know, tough, you're in the minority here. So anyway, so again, take it with a grain of salt that I will start by talking about innovation as seen by one registered wacko, and hopefully then race through it to get to a passion that I hope we can all share. So with that, DECA is my little company. This thing is already not clicking. I show you this picture to start for a couple of reasons. One is, yes, we're very proud of that iBot. It helps the disabled get around. That cluster at the bottom allows that thing, while balancing, as this thing does, to also walk up and down stairs. It's what really put us into balancing technology. This was almost a dividend off that serious medical product. Most of the products we do are medical. But there are three more important reasons why I'll start with this picture. Number one, you'll notice, yeah, we're in the Oval Office getting the National Medal of Technology, but even there, the literature we're looking at is first. And we're convincing Mr. President, you invite the winners of the Super Bowl, you invite the winners of the World Series to the White House, you ought to bring the winners of our competition, the kids that excel in something that will matter to their future and this country's future. He said, that's a great idea. It's on tape. He invites them to the White House. Anyway, the second reason, or another reason I bring that picture here is because I'm trying to dispel the rumor that when the situation demands it, I really can be a snappy dresser. And so the final reason I bring you that picture is because one of the things I will tell you about the process of innovation is that it's always surprising. Whatever you set out to do, you're surprised. Almost all the time, the surprises are bad. Every once in a while, the surprises are good, like getting a call to come down and do that, or finding out that the Food and Drug Administration approved this so that people can now use it. But to give you some sense of how surprises can be, I'll show you another picture of balancing technology after a short word from our sponsor. You look at the base of that machine, and yes, it was all done with Pro-E. And we started that project so long ago. This is when Pro-E was new, and it was hard to do that stuff. This is what the sub-assemblies looked like in the first version of that box. This is what it looks like a little more assembled. This is what the seating system, I already met a guy who's going to help me with the next generation of seating here. Anyway, that product, the Segway, our water systems, pretty much every big project we have at DECA is Pro-E. That's the only ad I'm going to do for them. So what else do you get in the way of surprises with things like balancing machines and presidents? You get up in the morning, and this picture is the front page of every newspaper in the country. Mr. Bush, they work better when you turn them on. So anyway, but I am an equal opportunity offender, and you'll see by the end, Mr. Bush now rides a new Segway with great self-confidence, including around the White House, and you'll see that. But now we get to innovation, what I'm supposed to talk about. Remember my caveats. I put a question mark on it because I really don't know what it is either. But I would tell you, again, all of this is directed at people that I think have a wildly naive misconception that innovation is about eureka, hurrah, success, entrepreneurship. Those things are so rare they make the news when they happen. I put a question mark on it because I don't think I really do know what it is, but I will try to tell you some of the rude realities and somewhat serious suggestions about how to create an environment that promotes it. And I hope the somewhat serious suggestions and the somewhat rude realities, some of which I think are humorous, some of which are not, we agree on which is which. To give you a sense of why I think innovation is very, very hard to define, I'm going to show you a picture. This is a south-pointing chariot. It was built just about 2,000 years ago. No, it is not a prototype or prior art to a Segway. However, it's a really, really cool piece of technology, and I think it demonstrates to me one of the most profound differences between innovation and invention. Invention is what we mostly do. use technology to create something that didn't exist before. Innovation happens very, very rarely when some invention actually meets a need in such a profound way that it changes the way we live, work, understand the world around us. And there are lots and lots of inventions. When I started getting patents, my first patent starts with a 3 million something. Patents we received recently start with a 7. There have been 4 million patents. Forget other inventions, just patents since I started doing this stuff. 4 million. Trust me, there haven't been 4 million innovations since I started. I mean, you know, fire, the wheel, movable type, the TV clicker. I mean, you know, so I'm going to try to stay with, even having people, again, management understand that innovation is about what organizations and societies do. It's the final, hopefully, big result of lots and lots of inventions. So you can decide whether this is an innovation or an invention. What does this thing do? It's a south-pointing chariot, developed at a time when people, I guess not much has changed. Humanity has particularly used its ingenuity throughout history to find ever more effective ways to go to war and to kill each other. Well, in China, they have this unique problem called the Gobi Desert. The Gobi Desert is 1,500 miles long, not very wide north to south. And they would have wars all the time, as did the Europeans and North Americans. But they have this big flat desert. You can't navigate very well on a big flat desert. And if you travel during the day, when you can see where you're going, you lose the element of surprise. You travel at night, you go off course, you get lost 1,500 miles, ruins the whole day. So some clever Chinese guys figured out that if you build a device like this, and you look at the way those wheels have differential gearing that comes up to a pair of parallel shafts, and then the top of those shafts has another set of differential gears that tie to this little icon. It turns out that if both of those wheels turn at exactly the same speed when you pull them along like this, the icon at the top doesn't rotate. If, however, that bar goes off course, I think I have if the bar goes off course and the outside wheel turns faster than the inside wheel, it's compensated, and that bar will always, or that icon will always point the same way. You look at this thing, and essentially, that's an analog computer. That's 1,500 years before Babbage ever thought about putting gears together. So the Chinese, 1,500 years before anybody in Europe were doing this, were building an analog summer. By the way, to those of you that don't understand an analog summer, your technical incompetence is not my problem. But you got to trust me on this one. This is really cool. So anyway, they build this thing, and they use it, presumably, to get across the desert. When I collect a lot of old technology, I have a house full of this stuff. The first time I saw this thing, I thought, this is unbelievable. Until you read a little history and you find out that 500 years before the Chinese built this analog computing machine, they knew that if you took lodestone, we now call that magnetic iron, of which Asia is replete with this stuff. They would take lodestone, put it on a cork, put it in a dish. It would always drift to the same side of the dish. Now, they gave this mystical and religious and ceremonial recognition in their literature, but never used it for this, a compass. Now, when you compare a device you can pick up, carry around, it's self-calibrating, it doesn't integrate error, you look at this thing and say that if they had this technology, but didn't know how to use it, but they had this technology before they built that device, in your own mind, that goes from being a potential great innovation to a very complex, unnecessarily complex invention. In fact, knowing that you have this makes you realize that the south-pointing chariot is not a great innovation, which it wasn't. It's perhaps the first example of a defense contractor. But, which brings me to rude reality number one. Technology alone is not what makes innovation. What we do with our technology, how society accepts or doesn't accept it, determines what's an innovation. Okay, now remember, as I said, I made this stack up over the years. It's been built up to talk to big organizations that asked me to talk about innovation. In my real life in innovation, I have never used PowerPoint for anything, ever. I don't make slides, I don't make charts, I don't read memos, I don't write memos. I walk around and talk to my people. I've got a couple of hundred brilliant engineers, and physicists, and mathematicians, and I talk to them. But if you're going to go and talk to a big company, you have to prove that you're serious. So you make charts, because that makes them, A, feel comfortable. Even though they want new and wild things, you got to have charts. And you got to show respect. So I now have some charts. It took me a long time to figure out how to make these charts, because I don't do this stuff, so you better be impressed. Okay. So these are my charts about innovation. I also wanted to show that I'm not some narrow-minded physicist. I can be a broad-based intellectual, so we quote people besides Einstein at least a few times, like T.S. Eliot, who really did say that between the idea and the reality falls the shadow. So here's my graph of the process of innovation based on that assumption. Now, you start out with any project, and there's always the pessimist and the optimist. But to get going, there's enthusiasm. Things start working well. Otherwise, you wouldn't have gotten the thing funded. Then in reality, like every project, things start to get a little tough. Something else in the business goes wrong, because R&D takes a while in business cycles anyway. And even though R&D and research and innovation is a tiny piece of a business, it's the stuff you cut off because it doesn't give you anything in 90 days. And so every once in a while, you know, you're down here. Now, this is also where I have to point out, every project our company has ever done, ever, ahead of schedule, under budget, more features than they asked for. But I'm imagining this could have happened to somebody trying to do something new. Then you go a little further. Typically, by the way, it's because there's some little group of people that have an irrational belief that something they're doing is important, and you can't put it on a balance sheet, and they just keep working. And then you find it might actually work, and then it starts to pay off, which is why you had the insight to do it 3 years ago. And finally, every once in a while, it works. And this is where you find out how everybody was behind you all along. That's the great part. That's the part it's just great. So that's chart number one, which brings me to your first suggestion. And that is, if you're going through hell, and by the way, again, to quote other than physicists and engineers, I had to reach out to a guy that really understands this process of innovation that was not a technology person. He was a political leader, but you want to talk about changing people's perspective of the world. How about Winston Churchill? But Winston Churchill took a very different perspective from the people around him, and he really did say, if you're going through hell, keep going. Now, I think that's more relevant to the process of innovation and invention than anything I've ever seen, because projects that are going well, anybody can do them. As soon as projects start going badly, people start losing their confidence and their courage and their vision. And instead of at least taking advantage of the one thing you know to be true, if everything surprised you, nothing's working, well, then you got nothing to lose, try something else. Most people, instead of taking that approach, they start to look like a deer in the headlights. And so once a project starts going badly, it can fall off the edge. If you really want to do new and different things, if you want to be innovative, not build model 23 of a product that's pretty much defined, all the boundary conditions are set, and all you're doing is tweaking it. I mean, that's good. It's unlikely you'll crash and burn doing that. But if you want to do really big new things, be prepared for you know what to happen. And then just, okay, we'll try something else. And don't get stuck. All right. Again, these slides were for management. So we have to show them how you differ between doing innovation and encouraging it organizationally compared to keeping your major business and product lines up. Conventional development schedule. You see, you design the part, you test the part, you design the other part, you test the part, you integrate the two parts, and you ship it. Now, that makes sense. You know, if it's Rev 23, you've been building these things for 100 years. I'd even argue that's not only so straightforward, I'd argue even this is way too conservative, even for these conservative management types, because if you really knew that after you designed it, the test would take this long, and after you designed the second one, the test would take this long, and then you're going to integrate them, the only way it would make sense to do this is if you really knew that the test would finish exactly then and be right. Well, if you knew the test would do that, the tests are redundant. Leave that part out, just ship it. So, on the other hand, I modified this chart a little bit for the innovative process, and it looks like this. This is the innovation schedule. Now, here, you start working, and wham, something really strange happens. Then you do a little more, and God, I think I've been here before. Then you start working, and you realize July is coming really fast. We got to ship. And we're just like, there's a time warp in here. So what you got to do is schedule the miracle to happen. That's the hard part. I don't know how to do that. So you got to get comfortable with this. If you don't get comfortable with that, it's a bad idea to tell people that you want to be in the innovation business. So after I made this one, I decided I might be over the edge with the management types, and I better get some reinforcements for the fact that I'm not the only guy in the world that can't produce miracles. And I figured around this point they'd all be saying, A, we got the wrong guy to come talk to us, and B, the fact that he doesn't know how to schedule or budget things is his problem, not ours. So I figured I'd bring in a really good innovator. I mean, here's a guy who innovated so fundamentally he changed the way we perceive space and time and how we live. Well, he actually said the following in his early days when he was inventing like cryocoolers, which he did. He was quite an interesting guy before he was working at the patent office. And he actually said on this process of innovation and research and development, if we knew what it was we were doing, it would not be called research, would it? So that's a more sophisticated way of making the same point. All right. That brings me to rude reality number 2 on this issue of innovation. And I would tell you it isn't about eureka entrepreneurship. It's about risk, failure, and unpredictability. And that is a very rude reality, and get used to it. That also brings me to my second suggestion. If all that's true, what would I advise you to do? Well, make sure that you fall behind early. The sooner you fall behind, the more time you have to catch up. So, now you can laugh at that. You can laugh at that. I said they're somewhat serious suggestions. Think about it. Every project you've ever had, I don't care, call it a 6-week project. Call it a 5-year project. So 10% of 5 years is a half year, is 6 months. Any project you can think of, 5-year project, by definition, it got started. Otherwise, it wouldn't be a 5-year project. The day it got started, I think pure logic says you'll never know less about this project than the day you finally got it funded and started and defined. And I'd also argue, just as humans learn things, the first 10% of that time, 6 months, will be the time that you learn more than you'll ever learn in any incremental 10% period. So to me, it's almost impossible, just from the laws of large numbers and how many different ways you can have an outcome, that at the end of 6 months, when you still have 4.5 years left, it's almost inconceivable that at the end of 6 months, when you know way more incrementally about that project than you knew when you started, that if you started an analysis at that 6-month point, that you'd say, it's going to take 4.5 years from here. We didn't learn anything that was surprisingly bad. We didn't learn anything that was surprisingly good that'll make this much easier. No, in that first, everything we learned since we started from profound ignorance, we're dead nuts right. But how many times do you get 6 months into a 5-year project and say, now let's reconsider and make it 6 years or 3 years? Never. Because if you're way behind at 6 months, A, you probably don't know, you haven't looked at it, you haven't reconsidered. Besides, we got this project, we got it funded, don't touch it. Or, hey, we got 4.5 years left, it's going to be somebody else's problem by the time we get that done, and we'll have shipped this thing out to, manufacturing. So nobody redoes it. And you go 2 years, then 3 years, then 4. By the way, if at the end of 6 months, when the burn rate was low, when the team was small, when there were no boundary conditions that were set, when there's lots of flexibility, you could have changed the schedule in or out a little, wouldn't have mattered. 4.5 years out of 5 years, they're counting on the new product, the tooling is underway, it's incredibly expensive, you got a high burn rate, they're expecting the new product, and finally, when it's inconceivable to deliver on the day of the anniversary of the 5th year, somebody is going to have to say, we got to change the schedule, bear the pain, and move on. And then you all go home saying, well, we finally did it. We made the decision. But if there's anybody in this room that believes, for any project you've ever seen that went late, that you actually affected the schedules, the budgets, the plans, at the earliest possible moment that a reasonable person could have, instead of at the last possible moment, you should come work with me. So you can think that's funny. I think it is funny. It's also how most people work. So that brings me to suggestion number 3. If it's all full of risk and all this other stuff, don't do it. Invent as a last resort, which is a terrible thing to say to a bunch of people that can't wait to get back to you too, but there is so much cool technology out there across so many different fields. It's almost inconceivable that you really have to start with a clean piece of paper to make almost anything a reality these days. The trouble is most people like to invent. Why buy that O-ring if we can make them old? So invent as a last resort, which is coming from a guy who's supposed to be an inventor, is maybe a harsh statement, but I will define it for you even more harshly. Invention, the art of concealing your sources. Now, I don't say that to the patent office. And if you take technology from one field into another, you still can get an invention out of it, and I'll give you examples of that. But you go to the aerospace industry, and they have been solving certain kinds of problems for 40 years, and it's just standard. They know how to do certain things. You go to the medical industry, and you look at physiology, there are certain things they've known how to do for a long time. Neither group knows that the other group is sitting on piles of solutions to what are now new problems in an unrelated field. Figure out how to get access to it, and in a world that's now all on the internet, that's easier to do, other than the fact that there's just so much technology happening so quickly. But even this idea that invention is the art of concealing your sources, I thought was a novel idea. And since I was quoting everybody else, I figured I might as well quote who said that. And it was me. Until a few months after I wrote that down, I was reading actually a book on art history and found that actually my statement was stolen and modified. But I didn't know it at the time, because actually there was another guy named Pablo Picasso who said, good artists borrow, great artists steal. And it was the same point in a very different field. It just gave me great confidence that I'm on the right track. So now I'll give you an example, a very quick example of that. I started out making stuff like this. It's an insulin pump that was made in the early 1980s. By the way, it may look a little dated, but if anybody wants to hold up your palm-sized 30-year-old cell phone, I'd like to see it. That's like 1980, 81. Anyway, I've got lots of engineers that make stuff like that, a drug delivery system. I also happen to have another little group up in Michigan that makes a slightly larger piece of technology, which in the grand scheme of things could be a drug delivery system. It looks like this. You could deliver 500 kilos of stuff pretty much anywhere. Anyway, that is me flying it. We've built about 1,000 of those things. But the reason I show this picture is I was approached by a major company, Johnson & Johnson, a number of years ago, and they said, you got to help us build a new version of a stent, one of these little things that goes into your heart. or into the coronary arteries around your heart. And it's basically a little tiny cannula. It looks like the smallest needle you've ever seen, with 96% of the metal cut away, so it's a cylindrical scaffolding that you can put a tube in and expand. And they were having trouble making it expand the right way. And yes, we used Pro-E to draw it, and yes, we used ANSYS to model it. But the goal was to quickly improve their stent, and they thought, coming to my little medical company, we would do that. There aren't too many people that design medical equipment that are experts in fatigue analysis, structural stuff, elastic deformation of 316 stainless steel, which is what these stents are made out of. So I went out to the guys that design our rotor heads. 18,000 pounds of load in those blades cyclically, 2 billion cycles at that. And if something goes wrong and that little nut, which we affectionately call the Jesus nut, comes off, it isn't pretty. So in about 2 weeks, the guys that design helicopter rotors and really understand how to do analysis of that stuff designed that, which became a major success. The idea that a coronary stent would be designed by guys that do rotor heads might seem odd, but don't invent if you don't have to. Which brings me to rude reality number 3. We spend a lot of time, once we make a product, solving solutions, not solving problems, which is why new ideas, new industries pop up, and then all of a sudden they reach a point where they sort of work, and then instead of saying based on all that knowledge, they have that hockey stick of knowledge and improvement, they go the other way. Because once you have a product that sort of works, everybody's obsessed with fixing the product. They forget about what the original problem was until somebody fundamentally changes the rules of the game. And that's when all the big guys that had all the market wonder what happened to them. And it was the fact that they're on version 23 of something, and almost all of their engineering horsepower is going into tweaking their product, not remembering what the customer need was. A very quick example of that. Well, by the way, another guy that would define, I think, that concept of we just keep tweaking our solutions instead of remembering each time we start with a clean piece of paper, what did the patient, in my case, most cases need, in your case, what does the customer want? But Henry David Thoreau defined invention as an improved means to an unimproved end. And as I said, an example of that, again, which I will have to run through, but that little box at the bottom is a dialysis machine, the size of a VCR that you could sit on by your bed. The big box there is a machine it replaced. The company that made that big machine came to me and didn't say, solve our solution. They said, solve our problem. Their problem was it's full of these heavy, expensive, unreliable valves, motors, pumps, strain beams, weight scales. But it was the leader in an industry, and they said, we just want to make it better and cheaper, and we need to solve our problem. And all their problems related to this hardware. We looked at it and said, gee, you got a patient that's being dialyzed. They got to live in a room 3 nights a week watching their blood go floating around. And this is not a happy situation. And you want us to make this machine a little better at doing that, but maybe the technology's around now to solve the real problem, which isn't that valves don't crush tubes as well as membranes could do things. The real solution should be that patients ought to be able to do this by themselves at home simply. They shouldn't need professional people to thread all this stuff together and make it work in some center. If we could make it so simple that there's a big green circle that you hit go and a big red octagon that you hit stop, and you plug a disposable that literally is a cassette in here every day, maybe they could do this therapy at home. Well, again, we couldn't put that good timeline, all that good stuff together. We took a guess at a couple-of-year project. A couple of years went by. I was very excited because we had invented a new method of pumping, valving, measuring, using thin membranes of plastic, eliminating valves with no weight scale. We were excited. All the core technology worked, the physics worked, the fluid dynamics worked, but we didn't have a nice-looking box. The project was essentially canceled. That dark night of the innovator. I had a small group of people that just wouldn't give up because we thought the hard part, the risky part was done, and that the upside would be enormous if we could do this. I'll tell you what happened later. Which brings me to rude reality number 4. While we were sitting there getting more and more behind, more and more frustrated, I must admit, we started thinking, maybe they're right. Maybe crushing tube is the way to do it. They know way more about dialysis than our little company will ever know. They're experts, we're not. Maybe they're right. It's an unnerving way to go to bed every night. Maybe they're right. But they weren't right. And that brings me to rude reality number 4 when it comes to innovation. And that is the reason that they were, quote, not right is because it's not what they didn't know, because they did know more about that machine and the technology than we did. It's not what you don't know that inhibits innovation. It's what you do know that just ain't so. And again, I think the reason innovation slows down, even when you get bigger and better and smarter about what you do, is because the boundary conditions are set around what you do. And it's very hard to give things up. Ironically, we think technology is the fastest moving human endeavor, but that means that you should be able to give things up more quickly. But because scientists and engineers live by like the laws, they're not repealing the second law of thermodynamics anytime soon. And conservation of energy is one of those things we learned. It may be subtle and difficult, but you never want to give it up. But most of the rules of engineering, not the laws of nature, but the rules of engineering change really quickly. More quickly than most other rules of human interaction. And yet we don't give them up, and it's what I think stifles innovation. For instance, when I was a kid, I knew things like television is the public stuff for everybody. There's ABC and NBC and CBS, and it's for everybody. So you put out the bunny ears and you pick it up. It's public. I knew that. And telephones were for private conversations, at least when I was a kid. And so you went over to the wire and you picked up that thing, and telephone is over the wire and it's private. Television is over the airwaves. I knew that. So did Ma Bell. So did the largest TV stations in the world. Well, we knew that. You ask any 9-year-old kid today, television is cable, and this is a telephone. And they know that, and they're right. So what I knew, what was true once, isn't true anymore. And the idea that in technology, what is true, truth changes. It's hard to accept, which is why companies as big as Ma Bell had trouble, and NBC and CBS. It's hard to see a world where things that once worked, that you built a whole company on, change. And if you don't change with it, if you're not the first to see it, somebody comes in and points out that you are now a south-pointing chariot. So, rude reality number 5. Innovation is not a spectator sport. It really isn't about the wacky engineers in the corner doing some things with some great gizmos and then the company will succeed. If you really want to innovate, everybody, everywhere has to be involved. If you have a project like, again, Rev 23, get it done. Put a schedule together, put a budget together, get it done, manage the process, you're fine. If you want to do innovation, it takes something way more than management, because when people are at that dark spot at the bottom, they need courage and they need vision. They need a lot of things that don't come out of the management book. So what's the difference between management and leadership? And management is doing things right. Leadership is doing the right things. That's much harder to define most of the time. I mean, good management would be give a machine gun to an axe murderer. It makes the process more efficient. It's not a good idea, though. Leadership would probably say something else. If you're going to innovate, you've really got to be able to deal with a lot of complexities that don't easily conform to a process. Which brings me to rude reality number 6. To err is human. We all know that. We believe it's true when we deal with our friends and our family. It's even biblical. We're quoting everybody here. But you want an innovative environment in a company. You look at the manuals that most companies have that explain how people interact with each other and what they do, and you could take their 5 or 10 or 20 volume set of stuff that evolves over time, because you got to have the process documented. And it all boils down to that little asterisk. Among individuals, which is why Americans, I think, are so creative. We always root for the underdog. We have a very, very innovative spirit compared to most of the world. But once you organize into a big process-oriented institution, to err as human may be true among friends, but unfortunately, it's not company policy. Again, you can laugh at that, but most companies, if somebody does something extraordinarily well, they'll get a little bit of a bonus, or they'll get ahead of their peers. They'll do a little better. But if you continually try to do the things that nobody else is willing to do, and you do them and you get a little ahead for succeeding, sooner or later, if you're the guy that does that, you're going to crash and burn on one of these, and then you're toast. And unless the goal and the reward for success is moderated and modulated to be consistent with the punishment for failure, you end up building an organization in which avoiding failure is what people learn how to do, instead of achieving what is the most plausible success. And that's what limits innovation. And even though big organizations have enormous resources and enormous history and lots of advantages over the little guys, I think the little guys have this huge opportunity because the punishment for failure isn't all that bad. And so people are willing to try. So, the current score. Rude reality is 6. Suggestions only 3. And they're sort of like, if you're going through hell, keep going, fall behind her. I mean, you know, this innovation stuff is a tough game. And the rude realities typically win, which would then bring you to, then why do it? When do you do it? How do you do it? Who should do it? Which is what I guess we all really want to know. Well, the why is easy, because innovation, when properly developed, I said can create whole industries. I think that's a understatement. Every new industry I can think of, and if you can think of one that doesn't align with this, let me know, but every new industry, from literally fire and riding animals, was the result of some huge innovation. And why we do it, I think, 2 things. The upside is huge, and mostly it's even beyond that. It's what human beings are about. You know, abstract ideas, understanding where we came from and where we're going. Why do we innovate? Because it's what we are. When do you innovate? Well, bringing it back to the world of business, my clients come to me and they say, Dean, we know that innovation is hard to do, it's hard to schedule, it's hard to budget, it's risky. So now that we have our product out, it's going to have a 5 or 10-year life. Now we have the time, the money, we can afford responsibly to risk and fail a few times. Right. That has never, ever happened, ever. I get a client when they show up, it's always, we just found out that brand X is going to do such and such. It's dramatically better than what we're doing. We need a brand new product. We need it right away. We don't have a lot of money. We don't have a lot of time. We can't afford to fail. That's a bad time to be innovating. So, again, to give you a more biblical perspective, when should you be innovating? I'll remind you, it wasn't raining when Noah started building the ark. Or maybe more importantly and more relevant to today, you know, people are all worried about energy. I am not. There's just too many good solutions out there that are now even cost-effective. Technology is moving fast. Now that we're focusing on it, it's not our problem. Our problems are going to be the ones we haven't figured out yet. But when should you start innovating? You shouldn't have to wait until you have no alternative. Look at the opportunity cost that's lost. And if you really do wait until there's no alternative, we will innovate. Humans will do that. But if you're the last one and you wait till the end, you probably won't end up at the front of the pack with what the new technology is. I don't want to use energy as an example. People are sensitive about that, so I'll use a slightly different version of that and point out that the Stone Age didn't end because we ran out of stone. So then we get on to the how. How do you innovate? That's easy. I hope, if it'll click. You don't define success as the lack of failure. Again, you learn to live with failing as long as you do it quickly and honestly and learn from it. You'll be very, very much more liberated to innovate if you can deal with that. The who of innovation, which is what I guess everybody really wants to know. Am I the innovator? Am I supposed to be? I said before, and I'll say it again, if an organization is really going to innovate collectively, it's everybody. And you could say, no, it's those crazy optimists. You know, Wilbur and Orville had to be optimists. I mean, I got this cast iron block that weighs a few hundred pounds. It kind of sputters a little and makes 22 horsepower. It's attached to this big wooden thing covered with canvas, and it's going to fly. You know, they had to be optimists. Well, that brought us airplanes. But there are pessimists in the world. Those are the guys that sit in the corner with the green eye shades. They have the, quote, judgment. They got the scars on their back. They're the serious adults that make sure we don't get into trouble while those inventors and innovators go off in the corner. Every once in a while we'll bring it in. I don't think so. I don't believe it. I think pessimists are just as much part of innovation as optimists. They bring us parachutes. Now, you can laugh at that, but I would suspect that the innovation in aerospace is as much related to the innovations in safety as it was in the innovations that need those systems. But the who, I'll very quickly get back to. That's a picture of that box I showed you. The who is that little group of people that were persistent. We finished that box. We delivered it. It was such a compelling change in the way patients get their care. It almost instantly took over the market. And though it was introduced a year or two late, last year, I'm happy to tell you, we shipped the 100 millionth therapy cassette for that thing, and it is pretty much a worldwide standard for home therapy now. But the who then is everybody, and that's the rudest reality of all. When that box finally came out, there was a great celebration at the sponsoring company. The leadership, not all of the management, but the leadership of that company knew that this thing existed in part because of these people that just wouldn't give up, this small group of very recalcitrant people. They had a big party, and on every table at that party, and to their credit, they invited my little group of engineers that built that machine along with their army of people. But on every table there was a card, and I'm pretty sure I was the pig and proud of it being described in that card, but I think it was a message from leadership of that Fortune 500 company to its management, and the card actually said, this is why it's a rude reality, that if you're really going to ask a wild pig to go into the woods and do that, you better stand back while he does it. And I think that sort of sums up why some big companies use little guys to get things done. Anyway, we're still on the who. That is a very modern, beautiful, south-pointing chariot. Every year, the guys at my little company, who are very creative, come up with some gift for our holiday party that always has a theme. And around my place, no matter what big project we go and do a review of, somebody, inevitably, not always me, will look at this beautiful piece of technology, whether it's hardware, software, systems, controls, metal, look at it and say, well, that's really beautiful, because these are creative guys, but is it a south-pointing chariot? Meaning, did we pick this technology because we're familiar with it, or is it the best solution? So this year, well, that year is probably 7, 8 years ago, they delivered that to me and said, but Dean, we just want you to know we really do listen, and we always worried about making south-pointing chariots. So go over to that icon over there and squeeze the box. And I did. And out popped Albert Einstein wearing a compass. So we're on The Who. The Who are the passionate people. These are the people that built our iBot. There it is in the corner. The Who is everybody. The Who is the collective group that are willing to work hard, fail a few times, to make a big difference in the world. And with the leverage engineers have, it's mostly us, frankly. That's all I'm going to say about innovation. And I think I have substantially less than 10 minutes left, so I'm going to run into what I really came to ask you to give me support with. How many people here have heard of FIRST? That's a good sign. You have to talk to the kids that are here. But basically, if we're going to innovate as a society, if we're going to maintain the quality of life, standard of living, all the things that we take for granted in our culture, all the things that the rest of us expect that would be you and me to do, whether it's keep the lights on, keep the water drinkable, cure the diseases, make the airlines run and be safe. If we're going to do all of that in a globally competitive society, we got to have the world's best scientists, engineers, inventors. We have a culture in America, because of our wealth, that has created the opportunity for a whole generation to grow up thinking that the coolest people in the world come from one of two places, Hollywood or the NBA. And if it's not the world of sports and it's not the world of entertainment, it really doesn't matter to most kids. And if you take women and minorities, by the time they're 10 to 12 years old in the United States, almost none of them think about science or engineering or inventing as even a plausible career option. And if you're a woman or minority in the inner city in the United States, you're thinking about the NBA, and if you're one of the 5 best ball bouncers in your community, you might make money there. If not, you'll spend 20 hours a week bouncing a ball, get to age 18, and if you're the 6th best ball bouncer on that team, you'll spend the rest of your life saying, would you like fries with that? And that's a fairly dismal, but I think realistic situation. Everybody wants to solve our education problem in this country with more teachers, more books, more this, more that, more standards. I will assert to you, we don't have an education problem. We have the best schools in the world. We spend more money on it, $800 billion a year. We don't have an education problem. We have a culture problem. It's a free society, and you get what you celebrate in a free society. Even little kids are free to celebrate whatever they want. So I said, if it's a culture problem, let's create a cultural institution that makes science and engineering every bit as attractive as basketball or Hollywood. The reason that kids like basketball in Hollywood is because they see young, enthusiastic people that do those things, sing and dance. They all know who Shaquille O'Neal is. They never see scientists and engineers that can do amazing things. Shaquille is one of the few people that can bounce a ball and be amazing. There aren't that many engineers and scientists that kids ever get to see that aren't stereotypical, antisocial, frizzy-haired, lab-coated sociopaths off in a basement somewhere. And so I said, if we're going to create a cultural institution that works with kids to convince them that these things are accessible and fun, we got to get to the engineering community. We got to find people that are passionate about science and engineering. We got to pair them up with kids in the real world and show them that, in fact, there are women scientists, engineers, and inventors. We got to show them that they can do this in a fun environment. So we created a sport, 6-week period, very intense, double elimination tournament at the end of it, instant winners and losers, bring the school band, bring the cheerleaders. And I convinced 23 little companies in the year 1992, little companies like Boeing, Intel, General Electric, United Technologies, Johnson & Johnson, Motorola. 23 companies adopted 23 schools around the country, let them work with the internal engineers. Many of them, I begged them, find me your young, enthusiastic engineers, because you can't kid a kid. It's not a science fair. You don't have to let the kids do all the work. FIRST is there to inspire the kids, not to teach them. Let the teachers do that. We're like the Shaquille O'Neals. Very quickly, because they're going to kick me out of here, I will show you the 15-year history of what happens when you make a sport out of science and technology. You invite all kids to it. You don't make it judgmental. You don't give them grades. You know, we justify all sports for kids as, well, yeah, I know it's not the ball bouncing. They're learning teamwork. Well, if teamwork's so important, then why is it when they do it in the classroom, we call it cheating? So, so I said, you like the sports model? We're going to do the sports model. We don't give them grades. We give them varsity letters. They work harder if you make the challenge higher. We don't let them do it pass-fail. We put them with the best of the best. So they're telling me I have a minute here, so I'm going to tell you why we did first. Okay? He really did say this. And if you want to know why I'm so concerned about kids being smart in an ever more technically sophisticated and dangerous world, because the difference between genius and stupidity is that genius has its limits. Think about that. We all know the problem. We all know that it's considered supply and demand by our culture, and we have loads of things we're going to do to fix this problem. We need tests, curriculum, teachers, merit pay, on and on and on. We've been trying for a generation. We keep sliding compared to the world. It's because our kids will continue to do that which they celebrate. We need the demand side. What's there? Nothing. Nothing. So, let's call it demand and supply. Let's create demand for inspiration and recognition of science and technology. Very quick review now. 15 years of history. 1992, President Bush comes to New Hampshire, and he's standing there, and he agreed he would invite the winners to the White House of our competition. 6 weeks later, everybody in the world that had known what FIRST is, those 23 companies and their kids, are in one high school gym for our single event at the end of that season. That room was everybody that ever heard of FIRST. 5 years later, we outgrew all the gyms in New Hampshire, and we had to go and build Olympic Village of Smarts down at Epcot. And that's what we did. Each year we grew at Epcot between 1995 and 2002. We outgrew the ability to hold our events at Epcot in 2002, so we took over at the end of that season a little place called the Astrodome in Houston. The last few years, more fittingly, we've taken over the home of the 1996 Olympics, the Georgia Dome in Atlanta. You look at that's just the pit area. Last year, we had 60,000 engineers, scientists, inventors, coaching, 60,000 volunteers working with kids around the country to give them some perspective of what the world could be like for people that are competent, that think, that create. Notice the team there, 38% of the kids on all these teams are women, 38%. This is the president. See, he did recover from that fall. About a month ago, he invited all the winners. We have now a Lego league. We have a Little League version. We have a middle school version, and we have a high school version. Those are the winning teams in the East Room of the White House, very staid and structured, all the teams saying, hello, Mr. President, talking to each one. A few minutes after that, one of the big robots came in. You'll see one upstairs. We got a little rowdy in that room. The tables were taken out. That's the East Room. But the chandeliers weren't removed. The robot's 9 feet high. The top of that stem goes off, and it was within inches of making quite an event in the White House. It all went fine. Statistics on last year's competitions. We had 1,300 high school teams, 37 cities around the United States holding regionals throughout the month of March. Every weekend in March, instead of having that one event in a high school gym in Manchester, every weekend in March, little cities like New York, Detroit, Chicago, Los Angeles, San Jose, Cleveland, Seattle, Houston, Orlando, Atlanta, 37 cities holding regional events, which ended up, as you saw, at the Georgia Dome. For First Lego League, we have 8,800 schools with teams being mentored all by volunteers. We have teams from 37 countries. We have the new VEX Challenge this year, which is an intermediate challenge. We had 70 universities sponsoring these kids and giving out this year $8 million in scholarships. Imagine giving scholarships to scholars. I mean, this is America. Anything could happen. So, inspiring the next generation is not going to be about reforming schools, whining and complaining, and being the generation that always expects a high standard of living and thinks it's our birthright to do better than the rest of the world. Every generation before us got there because they earned it, they created it. And education is not about filling a pail. It really isn't. As Yeats said, it's about lighting a fire. And our culture is obsessed with things that are burning with no content. The technical community of this country has to start giving kids a sense of what's important. It's not going to come from anywhere else. Athletes tell them athletics is important, and Britney Spears will tell them what she thinks is important. If you want the culture and you want the environment and you want the future of this country that I think you grew up expecting, you have to invest in it. Whether it's a professional thing that you do because you're part of the technical community, whether it's because you have kids, or whether it's because you're a responsible citizen with your own enlightened self-interest in the future. The technical community of the United States, I think, gets an A+ for creating our standard of living, the quality, the lights work, the water's drinkable. We get an A+. You've created it. There's no doubt about it. But we get a C, or maybe a C- for having a voice in the public. And in a media-driven society, it's not good enough to say, well, I'm busy doing the important stuff. It is important to help kids figure out the difference between nonsense and what's important. What is a pastime and what is a career and a profession? You need to have a voice. We're making it fun. We're making it easy. We put it in a context everybody understands. You'll get more out of it than you put into it. But we need to get to every school in the country with this program. The most critical need we have are competent technology people that we can put in an environment with kids. That's why I came down here today. You know, I know you're all busy. I'm busy too. I got day jobs, I got night jobs. I'm busy. You're busy. It's important. Everybody wants all sorts of things in this world, but you don't always get what you want. The good news is you typically, in the end, get what you deserve. We should deserve the things we want. These kids deserve to hear from serious people. We'll make it fun. Please get involved. Give it a try. Talk to these kids. Their robots are here. It's very easy to get involved. I'm happy to say that PTC is becoming a major sponsor with us. Talk to all the PTC people. They'll show you how to get involved, get on a team, and make a difference. Thanks.